Thank you for your attendance, members. It is now 2 o'clock. It's time for the Standards Committee meeting to convene. Welcome, members. Welcome, independent person, members of the public, officers. I'm not aware that we have any apologies.
Councillor Bridges.
We have a substitution. Councillor Bridget isn't available. Councillor Lee has stepped in, and you're welcome today, Councillor Lee. Look forward to contribution should you need to make it. As part and parcel of this process of apologies, there's also an element of welcome. And although there is a separate agenda item, what I'd like to do is I'd like to welcome and introduce to yourselves the new Parish and Town Council representatives who, as a body, you gave Councillor Flux, Councillor Dunn and myself the powers to interview and determine their suitability to be part of this committee. We've gone through that process, and we have 2 of the successful candidates here. I suspect the other one is just slightly late. But what I will do is I will give them gentlemen an opportunity to introduce themselves very briefly before we start the meat of the agenda. Gentlemen.
Pardon me. My name is Alan Varley. I'm a representative of Ponteland Town Council. I've been a councillor since 2014, and between 2017 and 2021 I was Mayor of Ponteland for that 4 terms. Previous to that, my history was working for the Home Office for 45 years as in the Immigration Department, latterly, well, over the last 30-odd years at Newcastle Airport as Chief Immigration Officer.
Thank you.
And I'm going to be very quick. My name is David Bewley and I represent Amble Town Council. I'm very pleased to be here today. Basically, I'm just going to sit, listen and learn and then give an opinion. Thank you.
Wisest way to be on. Item 2, you've all had papers, you've all had the opportunity in terms of disclosure. I have had no disclosures given to me from any member in relation to the agenda today. If you find that that isn't a necessary part and you do have to declare an interest, please do so at the earliest opportunity. I take it from the floor there is no conflict of interest or disclosure to be made currently. I'll take that as no. The next item is the minutes of the previous meeting. Again, you will have had those circulated. They are a matter of record. I simply need to determine whether or not you are happy that they are accurate. Thank you. If we could move on to the meat of the agenda, if you like, item number 4. Item number 4 relates to a decision that was made at the previous Standards Committee meeting. It is quite a complicated matter, and for that reason, I have determined that we would introduce Samantha Broadfoot, who is now Casey, who you will be aware of from our previous meeting, gave us very good, solid legal advice. However, circumstances have changed, and we do need to rethink certain elements of that previous decision. Obviously, I'll give Samantha that opportunity to expound more fully. You have had the papers in relation to that matter. You will have had an opportunity to look through them. I'm sure it raises a number of questions. I'm also grateful to Councillor Dunn, who raised an item in relation to the Constitution, whereby what we're looking at here may well have contravened an element of that process. As you know, I'm not sufficiently wise enough in myself to give you an answer to that, Councillor Dunn, but I'm sure that Samantha can, and if necessary, we may well need to suspend orders.
Possibly, Chair. Samantha will,
Yeah, I'll pass on to Samantha, and she can explain the full remit. What I would say is that we are in a position now where a decision we made the last time has been thrown somewhat into a cocked hat. A decision that's been made and agreed within full council has led to a determination by one of the complainants, a substantial complainant, that they wish to withdraw any involvement from the complaints that have been made. That in itself doesn't stop hearings taking place, but what it does is it substantially undermines the position. But because there are 3 complaints and there are a number of individuals involved, we cannot simply just disregard the complaints. So the complaints still have to be dealt with. So with that in mind, I'll pass on to Samantha and she can explain the report and pick up on any questions that may arise from that. Samantha.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Samantha Broadfoot KC, and I've been instructed as the independent legal advisor to this committee again in respect of 3 Code of Conduct complaints. I've had the pleasure of meeting many of you in person back in July, and I wrote the report in your bundle for your meeting this time. We are here again on the issue of certain complaints because there's been a fundamental change in circumstances since we last met. And the question for you is how to deal with that. I propose to briefly remind you of how we got to where we are, what has happened since, and then why I've made the recommendation in the report, which is basically send it back a step. So first of all, how we got here. On the 14th of July, the committee was asked to determine whether or not complaints against 3 members should be referred to a local hearing, or whether, as a result of findings in the Calla report, the complaints against those 3 members should be brought to an end. And you may remember that we discussed at that meeting the council's local arrangements, which is what you are required to have, and the powers that a decision maker has under paragraph 7.2 of those local arrangements. And the question that you as the committee had to answer turned in the end on the precise interpretation of that power. And you may remember that in fact I disagreed with the external report prepared on behalf of the monitoring officer that was before you at the time. And I explained that although the provisions were legally complex, my legal advice was that on the information that you had, you couldn't lawfully exercise the discretion to bring the complaints to an end. And so the committee, you resolved for the complaints to go forward to local hearing. All well and good. So that's how we got to this point. So what has happened since? As you know from my report, the complaints were made against 3 members that they breached the council's code of conduct. These complaints were investigated. I've called them A, B and C in my report because the identity of the people complained about is not relevant for these purposes. A very significant part of those complaints against A, B and C is that involved allegations made by and relating to Mrs. Lally. And as you all know, Mrs. Lally has withdrawn all her complaints and has stated that she wishes to move on from the disputes between herself and members. And you will have seen, indeed I've seen it, I think it's publicly available, there's a settlement, there was a heads of term settlement agreement, and in accordance with that, she's withdrawn her complaints. So what is left? Well, there is something left, but the majority of it, or certainly a very significant part of it, has now gone. So in practical terms, what this means is that the various parts of the complaints now need to be disentangled. We need to or rather those who are doing it, not me, but need to separate them out. And as a matter of process, the revised, much smaller, shorter investigation reports on what's left need to be put back to the original complainants, which is, as you've been told, a senior officer and a member, and before the matters can proceed any further. And in order to ascertain how much disentangling was actually required, the senior officer, who's the other senior officer who made complaints, has been contacted on several occasions, and I'm afraid that their position is still utterly ambiguous. So even though they've been asked a straight question, we've not had a straight answer. So that may change, I suppose, when they get the disentangled, report for their comment, etc. And then insofar as in relation to one member, so we'll call them C, another member has complained, the position in relation to that person is that they wish to pursue the matter, but, and I wish to make clear in case it wasn't already clear from the report, that person has not yet been consulted on the untangled or disaggregated report. So the reports, once they're untangled, will go back to the two people that are left who've made the complaints, and we'll see what they say. The withdrawal then of Mr. Lally's complaints gives rise to a fundamental change in circumstances, and the currently ambiguous position of the other officer adds to that. And the question is, what is this committee now to do? So thirdly, then, what is my advice? And my advice is that procedurally, the cleanest and fairest option is for the committee to rescind the July resolution and send the 3 complaints back a step, in effect. And this will allow those complaints to be properly disaggregated, and then a decision can be taken, obviously in accordance with the local arrangements, on how best to proceed with what's left. And it may be that once this is done, it becomes clear that the right course would then, for example, be local resolution rather than referring the matter to a hearing. What are the alternatives? In my view is that the alternatives, which is to sort of try and press on regardless, are potentially fraught with legal difficulties, and which would end up tying the committee in knots. I think that it would run contrary to the thrust of the Calla report, which calls for a fundamental reset and certainly wouldn't support proceeding with complaints that have been withdrawn. It would raise significant procedural fairness issues and be potentially unfair to the people against whom the complaints were made if they're faced with reports containing all sorts of allegations that are no longer pursued. It's likely to seriously undermine the terms of the settlement between the chief executive and the council, which of course was approved by full council, and in which both sides agreed to draw a line under these and other matters and move on. And I tried to emphasise, and I totally accept that my recommendation may well be causing an internal eyeball roll in relation to some, maybe even all of you, but I can't see the whites of your eyes from this video link. But unfortunately, the reality is that sometimes circumstances fundamentally change, and it seems right that the committee should be able to respond to that in a procedurally fair and impartial way. So my conclusion and my recommendation is that the safest course of action is to rescind the resolution of 14 July, which sent those 3 investigation reports to a local hearing, allowing the proper procedure arising as a result of this change in circumstances to run its course with the untangled, disaggregated reports, and then for the next steps to be taken in accordance with the council's local arrangements on the basis of what's left and what's remaining. So That's the meat of it, and obviously I'm happy to answer any questions about that. But just before we get to that point, it's the question has arisen about how the committee would implement this recommendation given the council's constitution and rules of procedure. And I'm grateful for the question, and I'm certainly grateful for having had it slightly in advance so that I could double check my thoughts on that. But there is a way through it, in short. So Rule 14.1 of the standing orders or the procedural rules provides that a motion or amendment to rescind a decision made at a meeting of the council within the past 6 months cannot be moved unless the notice of motion is signed by at least 9 members. And this rule applies in principle also to committees. The scope of this rule, though, is in fact not crystal clear. And I think there's a project going on to update the constitution, which may have also come out of CALA, but that's again not my area. But for these purposes, the position I think is relatively simple. So as you know, there are broadly 2 types of motion referred to in your constitution. There are motions on notice, which is Rule 10, and there are motions without notice, which is Rule 11. There is a good argument, and I'm happy to go into it if anybody wants me to, but there's a good argument that the 6-month moratorium applies only to motions on notice. And the matter that you are considering today would be a motion without notice because it falls within the list of matters of motions set out in Rule 11. It's actually 11.6, i.e. receiving reports or adoption of recommendations from officers or etc. and any resolutions following on for them. But so there's an argument that Rule 14 doesn't in fact apply to this kind of motion. But rather than get bogged down in all of that, the way to deal with it, if you are so minded, is to first pass a motion suspending Rule 14 for this item, and then passing the motion to accept my recommendation and rescind the decision. So the question was an entirely valid one. There is an answer to it. And so if you were minded to accept the recommendation, then there's a way to do it. Thank you.
Members, does anybody have a question substantially to Samantha in relation to the main body? Councillor.
Just with the council paid £359,000 to the chief executive to drop her complaints. Has she also dropped the evidence?
Yes. Yes. I have a letter from the chief executive whereby the former chief executive, I wish to withdraw my complaints regarding members and former members of Northumberland County Council. I wish to move on from the dispute between myself and members, and my expectation is that they will do the same. I will not assist, promote or support any other complaints that may arise out of the same or similar facts, which effectively means we can't use the information. If there are no further... Sorry.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Chair, can I just ask Samantha just to clarify for me, if we go down this route, then and these bits that raised from Mrs. Lally are taken out of the equation, then we'll start all over again. We'll have to have the new report, a new investigation, and starting again from scratch.
Thank you for your question. No, it doesn't. You're not starting all over again, actually. All you're doing, in fact, is going back a step. So there are already investigation reports, but the same investigating officer who did all the work is in the process of untangling them. So he's on top of the material, and he will be basically pulling out the material that's no longer relied upon, that's withdrawn the complaints, and then putting back into, effectively a smaller report, what's left. And then those reports will be sent to the complainants, the remaining complainants, in the usual way. So it's going back a step, but it's certainly not starting from the beginning.
Thanks, Chair. That clarifies that. My concern at the time was that if this was starting all over again, it was the cost implications. So we're working on more or less the same investigation reports as what we had previously. Thank you.
There would be no new investigation per se. We'd have to disentangle the information that we have, look at the validity of what we've got left, and determine from that what we can proceed with and how we can proceed with it. So, as Samantha has explained, it could be any one of the variations. It could still end up as a full hearing. It could end up as a local resolution.
Yeah. So, at that point, would it go to the monitoring officer to decide whether it was a local resolution? It wouldn't necessarily come back to this committee.
Samantha, would you pick up on that?
Yeah, that's right. So if you go back a step, it goes back to the monitoring officer, who then has to apply the tests and the criteria set out in your local arrangements. And so, yes, it is possible that, for example, that everyone involved were to agree that it should go to a local resolution, including the complainant, obviously. And I think I can't remember off the top of my head, but the process normally involves asking the independent person, I think, for input. So you've got arrangements that that lay out different options which would need to be followed. And so, yes, it is possible that it would end up as a local resolution rather than a full hearing. But that's potentially a good thing. Well, I mean, that matter for you, but it's to enable, different levels of complaint to be dealt with in different ways.
Any supplementary on that, Councillor Dunn?
Not at the minute,
No.
thanks.
Okay. Councillor Grimshaw.
Thank you. Well, I just, in view of the Carlisle report, etc., the public have lost faith in this council. The Carlisle report was damning, and we are in the process of addressing his concerns. And I just wonder how do you think the public will react if we decide to not go ahead with the original process addressing his concerns? And I just don't know, do they might think that we're trying to hide something, and we have a duty to be held accountable to the residents of Northumberland and the public. In order to do that, we need to proceed with a full preliminary hearing. I mean, I just don't know why we have to go back when we've reached this stage. And as my colleague said, it's cost an expensive QC to get those far. And yes, we've answered Liz's question in saying that it won't cost any more. But if we keep prolonging it, will it cost more? Sorry to be rather, not nice, Chair, but it's just I'm thinking on behalf of the members of the public.
It's not being nice. It's a valid question. It's a question that can and should be asked. No issue with that. I think what we're looking to try and do in terms of this particular item is accept the fact that there is still an issue here to be dealt with, that the complaints still have to be dealt with. And we need to try and do it, as you say, in the most cost-effective way that we can, as one consideration. However, we also have to look at it and see whether or not that process of a full hearing will actually turn out to be fundamentally flawed, and that there would be substantial grounds for legal challenge. So where does that then put the council? Where does it put the committee? Where does it put that hearing process? Now, I suspect Samantha has a better understanding and a better view than myself. Samantha, would you care to comment?
Thank you, Chair. I've accepted in my report and in writing that it's not the most satisfactory position to be in. But the reality is that when things fundamentally change, you've got to respond. And insofar as members of the public are concerned, my report, I've tried to be as utterly transparent as possible. I hope anybody reading it will understand why it is that the recommendation has been made in the way that it has. And it is absolutely the most procedurally fair way to deal with it, to go back a step. And the alternative could well give rise to all sorts of difficulties, because I mean, it's not for me probably to start making arguments about, you know, what members who have been complained about, you know, might say, but there are lots of procedural complications that would be raised if the matter went forward to a preliminary hearing now in its current state, that would tie the committee up in not just, you'd have to get detailed legal advice about it. It would be quite complicated, you know, I can see how actually going forward is not the straightforward way that superficially it might seem. Actually, it's quite a complicated thing. You'll be faced with arguments about, well, this is undermining, you know, the terms of the settlement, and this isn't fair to the councillors, and all the rest of it. So all we're doing really is saying, well, let's avoid all of that, not because we're avoiding the complaints, but because actually procedurally the best way of doing this is to rescind that decision and go back and say, right, okay, well, it's going back into its process. The process is there to make sure that things are done properly and fairly, and whatever comes out of that process at the end, you know, will all be done in accordance with the local arrangements. And if that includes publication, or if that includes a local hearing or local resolution, so be it.
Councillor Towns.
Thank you, Chair. Comment first, then a question. Comment really is, the majority of county councillors in this room, not including myself and at least one other, voted in full council for the deal with the Chief Executive, the former Chief Executive, which very clearly had set out in it that as part of that deal she would withdraw her allegations and not proceed with giving evidence in respect of those allegations. Now, I didn't vote for that, but that is what the majority of county councillors did vote for. So I find it slightly incredible that we have now questions being raised and saying it's worth spending a bit more money on this and pursuing this, when councillors voted for the deal with the Chief Executive largely on the basis that it would cut the costs of any further investigations. Now, my question would be, if we were not to follow Samantha's advice and rescind the decision made at the last meeting, would there be any potential cause for A, B and C, those being complained about, to raise complaints, new complaints about this process, or indeed would they have any legal cause of action against the council for perhaps being pursued for matters which have, when the clear advice of our KC is that it should not be pursued?
Samantha.
You know, that's...
Sorry, Samantha, just a second. I appreciate you may well have thoughts, but whilst you're in the public gallery, please, could you refrain from comment? Could
I was here at the day, and everybody who was here was told the cheapest option would be not to move forward.
Yes, you have an opinion. You have an opinion. Yeah, you have an. Thank you. If you hold to that, I will be grateful. Not in this particular setting. Not in this particular setting. Thank you. Samantha.
Thank you. The lawyers involved in thinking about this, which include Stephen Pearson from Freed Street, investigating officer, very experienced, do predict that there are some quite complicated and difficult legal arguments to be had over if the committee were to proceed. I don't want to say that anybody would have a slam dunk grounds for judicial review if you proceeded, because that would be foolish. But I can see, which is why I've made the recommendation that I have, that there are very serious arguments that could be raised by the members complained about if the matter were to proceed. And it would be, with utter respect to this committee, and obviously it's your decision, unwise to proceed on in that basis. And that's my legal advice, that it would be unwise and unsafe to just go forward with what you've got in the way that you've got it, given the express terms of the settlement agreement and the letter that's been sent to the chairman withdrawing the complaints and support.
Thank you, Samantha. Liz, do you want to come back on that? Councillor Dunn, you initiated the question. Is there anything further you'd like to bring to the table?
Not really. I mean, I have great difficulty in going back on a decision that were made in July, and my concern would be that by withdrawing these, and I don't think we've got, I think that is the way to go, by the way, but my main concern would be that in doing that, are we disregarding, was there any criminality things incorporated in those investigations that we are just disregarding?
I appreciate.
Sorry, secondly, I just want to make sure that the member has been consulted and would be consulted, that they wanted to still go forward after this process.
Yeah, effectively, Councillor, what we're doing is we're trying to effectively put our foot on the ball and give ourselves an opportunity to breathe, have a look at the complaints and see what can continue to go forward, not start from scratch. Part and parcel of that will be to have a discussion with the member who has made the complaint as to whether or not they wish to continue that process. But that will come out once we start the discussions and the negotiations around this. We're definitely not trying to take it back to the level where it's starting from scratch. What we're trying to do is trying to disentangle the substantive information, which, regardless of your thoughts, rightly or wrongly, is what we are facing. We might not like it, but we are facing it. And in facing it, we have to come up with a solution. This is the solution that we think is most suitable. Councillor Flux.
Yes, I just wanted to make a point about criminality. We're not Northumbria Police here. We're not a criminal court. We're not a criminal investigation unit. We're involved with the standards. If there's something that's criminal, that's a matter for being reported to Northumbria Police or whoever, and for them to investigate. It's not for us to investigate or to decide whether something's criminal or not. I just wanted to make that point, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Samantha, do you have a comment in relation to Councillor Flux's last point?
No, I've got nothing to add. Thank you.
Thank you. That leaves us in the situation of determining, if there's no other further questioning, two elements. The first one is the suspension so that we can consider the recommendation. To that end, I'll need somebody to propose that suspension. Thank you, Councillor Flux. And I would like a seconder, please. Councillor Stewart. Is that taken unanimously, or would I need to undertake a vote? I think for safety's sake, I'll undertake a vote. Those in favour, please show.
That's 5, Chair.
Yeah. Against?
That's
2.
Abstentions?
Abstentions? Thank you. That motion is carried. That brings us on to the substantial part, which is whether or not, as a body, as a committee, you are prepared to accept the second of the recommendations in the report. And that is that the committee resolved to rescind the resolution of the 14th of July and that the 3 Code of Conduct complaints should continue to look at hearing. Oh no, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong one. Sorry, my apologies. No, that's the right one, sorry. Yeah, rescind the resolution. So, again, do I have unanimity in that, or...
Moved and seconded first, yeah. It needs moved and seconded first.
Yeah. Could I have a mover for the resolution? Councillor Flux.
No one else will, I will, Chair.
Do I have a second? Thank you, Councillor Stewart. I will take it to a vote. Those in favour of the resolution, please show.
That's 5,
I have
Chair.
5. Those against? I have 2. Abstention? 2. Motion is carried. Thank you, members. Thank you, Samantha.
Thank you all very much.
If you care to remain part of the meeting, feel free to do so, but you should not be questioned further.
Thank you. I think I'll leave you all to it.
Thank
Good
you.
afternoon to everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, members. Can we move on to item 5, which is the appointment of parish council representatives? The parish council representatives have already introduced themselves, so you are aware. This report is a matter of information. The committee vested their trust in Councillors Flux, Councillor Dunn and myself to undertake an interview process with parish and town councillors in relation to them becoming part and parcel.
Excuse us, Chair. There's a full conversation going on behind us, and I can't actually hear what you're saying.
So, sorry, if you wouldn't mind, just refrain, please. Thank you. Much appreciated. As I say, matter of information for this report. Councillors Flux, Dunn and myself formed the group that interviewed a number of elected members from the parish and town council. We have come to a conclusion and we have determined that there are 3 representatives who are going to come from parish and town council. They are Councillor Bewley, Varley and Barrett. What I would say is I have a huge amount of thanks to Councillor Dunn, to Councillor Flux for their involvement in the interview process. It was enlightening, I think, is a good description. The calibre of the candidates was good. It's very good. And also very challenging for people at an interview. They were prepared to challenge, which I was very pleased about. So, as I say, as a matter of information, just reporting back to committee that process has now been concluded. Thank you.
Can I just add my thanks to you for chairing that, and thanks to Helen Lancaster, who was involved in that process as well. And as you say, it was very enlightening, Chair. Thank you very much, Chair.
Noted, Councillor. Item 6 is the appointment of the independent persons. I don't know, do you want to pick up on this deal, or are you happy for me to deal with it?
I'm happy for you to deal with the chair as part of the interview panel.
Again, many thanks to Councillor Flux, Councillor Dunn, who, along with myself, formed the group that undertook interviews. Oh, sorry, Leslie, could you distribute the CVs? I'm distributing some information on pink paper in relation to candidates who were interviewed. It has no real specific purpose other than to advise you as to the level and the calibre of the people who were looking to be part and parcel of our package. I have to say that we had a very high calibre of candidate. CVs were very impressive, and every single person who came to interview was very impressive. We had considerable difficulty in actually teasing out the best candidate. However, along with some independent advice from Suki, we did come to some conclusions. As I say, it was quite a fraught argument at the end because we did have at least 4 people who were very, very close. We have ultimately chosen 2 independent persons from that process. They will attend this meeting from January, assuming that you as a committee are happy to go with the decisions of that panel. We were formed on that basis, but ultimately it is this committee that has to determine whether or not the two candidates that have been chosen, you're happy for us to recommend them to council.
Chamber of the public at this stage, which may be the case in normal circumstances, but I think if we're just careful what we're saying about the pink papers.
To be fair, Councillor, my report will be finished once we've determined as a committee that we're happy for those two parties to be recommended to council. Can I take a unanimous position on that, or do I need to take a vote?
Just as long as it's moved and seconded.
Chair, I was hoping someone else might propose this because I was on the committee.
Right, thank you, Councillor Reid. Thank you, Councillor Towns. Do I have a unanimous position in relation to that? Thank you. And we will move that on to full council for their endorsement, and those independent persons will form part of the committee and will assist officers in the course of their activities after November the 2nd, which is the full council meeting. If we could move on to item 7, which is the Code of Conduct Complaint Progress Report. This one I will give to you.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, members will be familiar with the way in which officers present the statistics on member codes of conduct complaints, and that's seen in the attached table to this report. Previously, we have made the point that for 2022 we have seen a marked increase in complaints, and this is something that members have asked questions on previously. At the previous meeting, members also asked for maybe a little more information on the current position or trends. As far as we've got, Chair, I have noted the current position at paragraph 5 of the report, which gives a little more information on the current position. Since the last meeting, Chair, the numbers of complaints have reduced, both in the rate in which they have been submitted, but also in terms of live cases. We currently have, just as an update to the figures in the report, Chair, we currently have 18 live cases, and that's out of a total of 48 cases for this year. So there have been a few more recent complaints. However, since the last meeting, we have managed to resolve 30 of these complaints, just from a bit of dedicated resources being applied. So, Chair, the figures and the statistics are in the table, and I'm happy to answer any questions should members have them, while saying, of course, as members will be aware, that I can't obviously discuss any details of any particular matters. Thank you, Chair.
Any members have any questions? That being the case, can I ask for someone to move the report for acceptance? Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Thank you, Councillor Reid. Can I take that as unanimous or? Thank you. Item 8, items of urgent business. I haven't had any items of urgent business brought to my attention. I am prepared, even at this late stage, to take anything from yourselves. That being the case, I'll end that particular part of the business. The date and the time of the next meeting will be Thursday, the 12th of January, in this very room, and it will be at 2 p.m. Members of the public, officers, independent member, thank you for your time, thank you for your attendance.